Hurting a male empath is one of the few mistakes in a relationship that cannot be undone. Not because he is vindictive, not because he holds grudges, not because he will make you pay for it in any way you will ever be able to point to directly, but because of what the pain builds inside him without him trying. Because of the specific psychological transformation that happens when a man who feels everything at a depth most people never reach decides quietly, without announcement, that you no longer have access to that depth. You do not get a warning. You do not get a countdown. You do not get a conversation where he tells you things have changed. You get one day where something feels slightly different. A degree of warmth that used to be automatic is now absent. A quality of attention that you had stopped noticing because it was always there is now gone. And by the time you figure out what it is, the door is already closed, and there is no handle on your side. And the most disorienting part of all of it, the part that nobody who's been on the receiving end of this ever fully recovers from, is that he will not be angry when it happens. He will be fine, genuinely, quietly, permanently fine. And you will spend a long time trying to figure out how a man who loved you that deeply got to fine that completely. Let me explain. Before I do, I want to let you know that in the next 30 minutes, you are going to understand the complete internal architecture of what happens to a male empath when he is hurt. Not the surface version, not the definition, the actual mechanism, the specific stages, the psychological transformation that most people never see coming because it does not announce itself. And here is where I am going to exceed that promise, because this video is not just about what happens to him. It is about what he becomes. And what he becomes after the breaking point is something that I believe is one of the most underestimated and misunderstood transformations in all of human psychology. Stay for the final section. That is where everything lands. And if you are new here, your algorithm already knows something about you. It knows you think at a depth most people do not bother with. This is Psych 1.0. We go where most psychology content is too careful to go. Hit subscribe right now, because what is coming on this channel over the next few weeks is going to be the most important content we have made. You do not want to find it late. Subscribe, then stay with me. Before we go into what happens when you hurt one, I need to make sure we are talking about the same person. Because the male empath is one of the most misrepresented types in all of psychology. He gets confused with the sensitive man who cries at films, or the passive man who avoids conflict, or the people pleaser who cannot say no. He is none of those things necessarily. The male empath is something more specific and more structural than any of those descriptions. He feels what other people feel, not as a metaphor, not as a figure of speech, as a physiological event that happens before any conscious decision is made. Walk into a room where the energy is off, and he has already registered it before he has taken his coat off. Sit across from him when you are carrying something heavy that you have not told anyone about, and he will ask you about it before you have said a word. Not because he analyzed the signals, because something in him responded to something in you at a level beneath language. This is not weakness. In most men who carry it, it is actually the opposite. Because the male empath has spent his entire life navigating a world that told him what he feels is too much, too deep, too intense for a man. So he learned to carry it quietly, to process internally, to feel everything at full volume while presenting something considerably more measured to the world. That combination, depth of feeling plus practiced composure, produces a specific kind of man that most people have never encountered and do not know how to read. He is the man who remembers what you told him 3 months ago about something you were worried about and asks you how it turned out. He is the man who notices when someone at the table is performing happiness and says nothing in the moment, but checks in privately later. He is the man who, in a crisis, is somehow the calmest person in the room, not because he feels less, but because he has so much practice holding difficult feelings without being visibly destabilized by them.
He is also, and this is the part that matters most for today, the man who gives his care with a completeness that most people have never experienced from another person. When a male empath is in a relationship, a friendship, a family dynamic, he is not partially present. He does not show up with a fraction of himself while the rest is somewhere else. He is there, fully, with the entirety of what he is capable of feeling and giving and noticing. Which makes what happens when you hurt him a very specific kind of story. Because you are not just losing someone who was fond of you, you are losing the rarest quality of attention that exists in human relationships. And you will know that, eventually, when it is already gone.
His name was Marcus, and I want you to see him clearly before we go into what happened, because Marcus was not a soft man in the way that word gets used dismissively. He was direct when directness was needed. He was physically and professionally capable in all the ways the world tends to measure those things. His friends described him as solid, the kind of man you called when things got hard, not because he had all the answers, but because something about his presence made the problem feel less catastrophic. He was also an empath in the complete structural sense of the word, which meant he felt everything. His own things, other people's things, the emotional weather of rooms and conversations and relationships, arriving in him like information before it arrived as thought. He had learned over years to carry this quietly. Men who feel as deeply as Marcus tend to learn this early. The world does not have a comfortable category for a man who is moved by things, so you learn to be moved privately and present something more legible publicly. Marcus had that down. He met her at a point in his life when he was genuinely open, not desperately so, just open in the way that happens when a man has done enough internal work to no longer be afraid of what closeness might cost him. He showed up completely, the way empaths do. He listened in a way that people described afterward as feeling like being heard for the first time. He remembered things. He noticed things. He created, through nothing more than the quality of his presence, an environment in which she felt entirely safe to be exactly who she was. She called it love. She was not wrong. But she also, without realizing it, began treating Marcus's availability as a given rather than a gift. Here is the thing about male empaths that makes them specifically vulnerable to this dynamic. They do not experience other people's pain as separate from their own. When she was struggling, Marcus felt it. When she was stressed, his system oriented toward her distress automatically. When she needed something, he was there before she finished asking, because he had already sensed the need before the words arrived. This is not codependency. This is structural empathy operating exactly as it is designed to. And she came to rely on it. Not maliciously, not with awareness of what she was doing.
She simply stopped asking if he was okay with the same frequency he asked her. She stopped noticing what he was carrying because he carried things so quietly. She stopped treating his availability as something that required reciprocity. And when Marcus did occasionally surface something of his own, she received it with a kind of distraction that he never called out, but registered completely. Because empaths
register everything. They just do not always say so. He gave her the benefit of the doubt multiple times, then many more times after that. Because male empaths are not naive, they are generous. There is a difference. Naivety does not see clearly. Generosity sees clearly and chooses to extend grace anyway. Marcus saw clearly. He just kept choosing grace. Until the morning he woke up and realized he had run out of it. The first sign that something was restructuring in Marcus came not dramatically, but with a very specific absence. He stopped explaining himself.
When she misread something he said and held on to the misreading, he used to spend real energy correcting it, walking her back through his actual meaning, bridging the gap between what he intended and what she received. One day, he just let it stand. Not because he did not care about being understood, because something in him had recognized that some people are committed to their version of events in a way that clarity will never change. And he stopped spending himself trying to provide clarity to someone who was not genuinely looking for it. This is the first stage of what happens when you hurt a male empath. They stop leaking. And what I mean by that is this.
The male empath's care flows outward naturally. It is not a policy he has decided on. It is how he is organized. His attention, his generosity, his emotional labor move toward the people he cares about automatically. When he is hurt repeatedly by someone who treats that flow as a right rather than a gift, the flow stops. Not because he has become cold, because he has become contained. The care is still fully present inside him. It just stops moving toward you. She noticed something was different before she could name what it was. Marcus was still there, still present in the technical sense, still responding, still showing up, but the temperature had changed. The quality of attention that had felt like oxygen was now at a lower concentration, and she found herself reaching for it instead of simply receiving it. She thought he was going through something. She waited for him to come back to himself.
What she did not understand was that he had already come back to himself. He had just come back to a version of himself that no longer included her in the inner circle. And those are two very different things. I want to stop here because I think some of the men watching this have lived some version of Marcus's experience. You gave someone access to the deepest version of yourself, and they treated it like it was just always going to be there. Drop one word in the comments that describes how that felt when you realized it. Just one word. I will be reading every single one.
What happened to Marcus has a specific psychological architecture, and I want to walk you through it precisely. Because most people, when they observe this happening in a man, interpret it as shutting down, emotional unavailability, the classic male withdrawal that gets pathologized in every relationship advice article ever written. It is none of those things. What is happening is discernment being built in real time. And discernment is one of the most sophisticated and valuable psychological capacities a human being can develop. Here is the specific internal process, stage by stage. Stage 1, the shift from leaking to containing. The male empath's default state is outward emotional flow. His care and attention and sensitivity and labor moves naturally toward the people he is invested in. This happens below the level of conscious decision.
When he is hurt repeatedly by someone who treats that flow as automatic access rather than as a gift being offered, the nervous system does something remarkable. It redirects. The same sensitivity that was flowing outward begins moving inward. The male empath begins applying to his own inner life the quality of attention he has been giving everyone else.
He starts noticing what he actually feels beneath the layer of what he has been managing for other people's comfort. He starts trusting his own perceptions as the primary data, rather than running them through other people's interpretations first. This is not withdrawal. This is return. He is returning to himself after a significant period of being elsewhere. Stage 2, compression rather than hardening. This is the most important thing to understand about a male empath in this process. He does not get harder, he gets denser. Something that was expansive and flowing and outward becomes concentrated and contained and internal. The feeling does not disappear. It becomes private, held rather than expressed, felt at the same depth as always, but no longer visible from the outside. This is why people who have hurt male empaths consistently describe the same experience. They say he just went cold. He did not go cold. He went private. And those two things feel identical from the outside and could not be more different from the inside. Stage 3, becoming closer to himself than to anyone else. This stage is the one that produces the quality of settled finality that people on the outside find so difficult to penetrate. After years of orienting his sensitivity toward other people's realities, the male empath in this stage begins the process of returning to his own intuition as the primary authority. He stops running his perceptions through other people's narratives. He stops second-guessing what he knows to be true because someone else is confident it is not. He trusts what he feels. For a man who has spent years feeling everything and often being told that what he feels is too much or not accurate or a misreading, that trust in his own perception is both a profound act of self-reclamation and an almost complete immunity to manipulation. You cannot gaslight a man who has returned to himself because he is no longer using your version of reality as his reference point. Stage 4, going dark. This is the stage that genuinely unsettles people who were relying on his emotional reactivity to maintain the dynamic. When a male empath determines that his empathy is being used as a manipulation target, he enters a state of complete emotional withdrawal that has one very specific characteristic. There is nothing left there to respond to. The person who ran hot and cold, who relied on his reactions to know their next move, suddenly finds themselves in a room where the other player has quietly, permanently left the game. Not dramatically, not with a speech or a scene, just gone from the inside while still physically present. And the people who depend on emotional reactivity to maintain control have no move for that. The lever still exists. It is just no longer connected to anything. That is going dark. And it is the most complete form of self-protection that exists in a man who has learned exactly what his empathy is worth and exactly what it is not. This is the part I promised would change how you understand this, and I want to deliver that promise fully. Because what a male empath becomes after the breaking point is not what anyone who hurt him was prepared for. Most people expect one of two outcomes. They expect him to eventually soften, to come back, to return to availability,
because that has always been the rhythm. He pulls back briefly, then returns. That pattern has always resolved itself before. Or they expect him to fall apart, to need them, to discover that the depth of feeling that made him who he is becomes the thing that breaks him without the relationship to hold it. Neither of those things happens. What happens instead is a transformation that researchers who study empathic psychology have described using one specific word: rebirth. And here is exactly what that looks like in a man. First, he treats his own sensitivity as private property. The male empath who has been through the breaking point and the restructuring that follows begins treating his emotional depth as a resource with an extremely limited and carefully controlled distribution. Not everyone gets access to the version of him that sees them completely. You have to earn it.
And the criteria for earning it is simple, consistent, and completely non-negotiable. You have to demonstrate over time that you know what you are being given. That bar eliminates the majority of people who previously had automatic access. And he does not apologize for that. Not because he has become cold or guarded in the way that word usually means, but because he has simply become accurate about where his energy belongs. Second, he stops disappearing. One of the most consistent patterns in male empaths who have not yet reached the breaking point is the quiet self-erasure that happens in relationships, where their needs are chronically deprioritized. They make themselves smaller. They take up less space than they are entitled to. They edit their own needs before expressing them, because they have learned somewhere along the way that their needs create a burden that the other person communicates resentment about. After the breaking point, that stops. The male empath who has been through this process stops disappearing to keep other people comfortable. He says the thing. He takes the space. He has the need without running it through someone else's comfort level first. Not as aggression, not as a performance of reclaimed confidence, as the natural, quiet result of a man who has come home to himself after a long time away and is no longer interested in leaving again for someone else's convenience. Third, he becomes something that is genuinely difficult to describe without experiencing it directly. He becomes the most discerning and the most powerful version of what he always was. Before the breaking point, the male empath's compassion flows without discrimination. Everyone in his inner circle gets the full version of him. The depth, the attention, the quality of presence that makes people feel like the most important person in the room. After the breaking point, that compassion is still fully present, but it is directed by something that was not there before: judgment. Not judgment in the critical sense, judgment in the original sense. The capacity to assess clearly and act accordingly. He becomes extraordinarily accurate at identifying who actually deserves what he has to give versus who simply wants to consume it. And he becomes completely comfortable directing his care toward the former and withholding it from the latter without guilt, without explanation, and without looking back. That is not coldness.
That is the highest form of emotional intelligence that exists in a human being. The compassion is still fully intact. It is just no longer free. Before the final section, I want to ask something directly. If you are a man who has been through some version of this process, finish this sentence in the comments. The day I stopped being available to everyone was the day I. Just finish it honestly, whatever is true. I will be reading every single one, and I think this is going to be one of the most powerful comment sections on this channel.
Fourth, the closed door. This is the hardest part for the people who hurt male empaths to accept, and it is the part that I think explains the specific disorientation that people describe when they realize a male empath has moved on. When he closes a door, it does not slam. There is no dramatic exit, no final confrontation, no explosion that you can point to as the moment everything ended. No speech. No list of grievances delivered at volume. The door just closes. Quietly. With a gentleness that is somehow more final than any rage could be. And it does not reopen. Not because he is punishing you, not because he is making a point, but because the decision to close it was not made quickly or reactively. It was made over a long period of internal processing, of giving benefit of the doubt, of trying again, of absorbing, of choosing grace repeatedly until grace ran out. By the time the door closes, it has already been closed internally for a very long time. What you are witnessing when you realize it is shut is not the decision being made. It is the decision being expressed. And because male empaths process everything internally, the gap between when the decision was made and when you see it can be months or years.
Which is why people consistently describe being blindsided by it. They were not blindsided. They just were not paying attention to a man who had been telling them everything they needed to know in a language they never bothered to learn. The work now is not to reopen doors your nervous system closed for good reason. The work is to stay as close to yourself as you have learned to stay to the people you care about. That attention belongs to you first, always. For the person who hurt him, the closed door is not a punishment designed to make you suffer. It is accurate information about the value of what you had access to and how you treated it. And the most important thing you can do with that information is not to find a way to reopen the door. It is to understand with complete honesty what happened, so that the next time a man of that depth lets you into his world, you know what you are holding. Because male empaths are not common. And the next one who trusts you with that depth of access will be watching in his quiet and completely accurate way from the very first moment to see whether you know what you are being given.
Marcus is doing well. He is still an empath. You do not lose that. It is not a wound that heals by becoming something else. It is a capacity that deepens by becoming more accurately directed. He told me something recently that I want to leave every man watching this with. He said, "I used to think that feeling everything made me the most available man in any room. Now I understand it makes me the most selective. And those two things look identical from the outside until the day they do not. That is it. That is the whole thing. Your depth of feeling is not the reason people can hurt you. It is the reason the right people will never want to. If this video landed somewhere real for you, share it with one man who needs to hear it. Not to explain anything to anyone, just because this is the kind of content that finds the people it was meant for and changes something when it does. And if you are not subscribed to Psyche 1.0 yet, this is the moment. Every week on this channel, we go into the places most psychology content is too comfortable to avoid. The mechanisms,
The architecture, the things underneath the things that explain not just what is happening, but why it keeps happening to you specifically, and what actually shifts it at the root level. That is what we do here. Subscribe and come with us. Take care of your mind. It is the only one you have got.